Darkfire Audio presents Call of the Herald, Book 1 in the Dawning of Power trilogy, written by Brian Rathbone, narrated by Chris Snellgrove. Chapter 11. One man's offal is another man's harvest. Ikari Jundin, mushroom farmer. Benjen woke them early. When he checked on the health of the unconscious soldier, he seemed almost relieved the man had died in the night. He and Chase dragged the dead man from the cavern and hid the body with the other. When they returned, Benjen examined the pile of armor and weapons the soldiers had carried. He took a short sword, belt sheath, and bracers for himself. The sword had a black leather handle and a decent edge. Not a fine blade, but good to have. He motioned the others over and began to distribute the dead soldier's belongings to the rest of them. He gave Chase the other short sword, belt sheath, and bracers. The boots went to Strom and Osborne to replace their lighter shoes. Catrin asked for one of the belt knives left in the pile, and Benjen handed her one still in the sheath. She was hesitant to discard her old knife, and decided to wear both, not wanting to abandon the old one with the broken tip. Osborne pulled the other soldier's knife from its sheath. Catrin expected some sort of noise when he unsheathed it, but it slid free without a sound. The wicked-looking blade curved slightly before the tip. Its upper edge was serrated, and it had a straight edge on the bottom. He pronounced it perfect for him.
"The plan is simple," Benjen said. "We travel north and go straight at the approaching army, but we stay high in the mountains. Once we sneak past them, we will turn east toward the desert. Perhaps we'll get lucky and have foul weather to hide us. Perhaps not. Either way, we'll need to be ready to take cover at all times. Keep your eyes open for places to hide, as you may only get a moment's notice. We could go due east from here, but I fear those passes are heavily guarded. As outrageous as it may sound, sneaking past the army is probably our safest choice. I doubt the patrols will be this far out by first light. We need to get to the next plateau soon if we are to avoid them,"
Benjen said, and he set out at a breakneck pace. When they crested a rise, Benjen paused and strained to see into the distance.
"We should be able to see the falls from here, but I can't make them out," he said.
Catrin and the others squinted in the pre-dawn light, but visibility was low.
"I think they are still a long way off,"
Chase said. Benjen nodded.
"Let's go. We've no time to waste,"
he said, heading off at a brisk walk. As they drew closer, Catrin saw the falls. They did not seem as grand as Benjen had described them, barely visible in the distance. Perhaps they had been larger when Benjen last saw them, but she wondered how that could be possible when this was the rainiest spring any of them had ever seen. They froze when Benjen hunched down and signaled them to do the same.
"I thought I saw something moving in the trees," he said after a few moments. "I think it's clear, so let's move."
As they neared the base of the falls, the banks of the river came into view.
"Above the falls there is no eastern shore. The river runs along the rock face. We'll need to stay on the west side for now,"
Benjen said. As they came closer to the river, they were surprised by what they saw. The water level was extremely low, the flow muddy and sluggish. The water was well below the normal watermarks, and they estimated it was less than half what it should be. By the time they reached the base of the falls, the sun was high in the sky, and Benjen said he planned to use the sun for cover. They would climb the jagged cliff wall while the sun was high, which would make it harder for soldiers to spot them with the sunlight in their eyes. He found a place far enough away from the falls for them to remain dry, and there were many irregularities in the rock face, which would make for an easier climb. Their ascent was slow and tenuous, irregular rocks providing some handholds and footholds, but in many places they were widely spaced. In some instances they had to scale the nearly sheer face with little, if anything, to grab onto. When they finally reached the plateau, they did not find the river they had been expecting, and instead saw a muddy lake that covered almost the entire plateau. Chase spotted the cause of the flooding near the top of the falls. The recent storms had downed a large number of trees. At least a dozen had been swept away by the river and were creating a dam just before the falls, where the river narrowed. Only a fraction of the water flowed past the debris. The rest continued to flood the plateau. A narrow ribbon of land separated the newly formed lake from the cliff, but it was clearly saturated. The valley beyond the plateau was completely swamped by the backed-up river, effectively cutting off their escape.
"Craps," Benjen said. "We're going to need to find a way around this. Stay alert."
An enormous rock finger jutted into the air above the valley. Skirting the lake, they plodded through the mud, which threatened to remove their boots with every step. At times they walked through ankle-deep water. Around the rock finger, the soil border was less than a pace wide. The promontory was slender and appeared fragile, warped and twisted by eons of wind-borne sand.
"Stay back. I'm going out for a look,"
Benjen said.
"You aren't really thinking of walking out on that rock, are you?"
Strom asked, incredulous.
"That thing looks like it could fall at any moment, even without your weight on it."
"It's been here for thousands of years, and I'm betting it'll be here for thousands more. Its frailty is only an illusion."
Benjen crept onto the rock. The winds whipped around him, and he was nearly blown off. He caught himself, but the movement sent rocks bouncing into the valley below.
"I think we've been spotted," he said. "There are soldiers below, and they are climbing toward us. We need to retreat as fast as we can. We must go back the way we came. I don't think we'll be able to get through the flooded valley without ruining our food supply or drowning."
Catrin sat to one side, absorbed in her thoughts, and with every moment her anger grew. The Jean threatened everything she held dear. Struggling to think of a way to stop the approaching army, or at least hamper its progress, she stewed, biting her lip. Benjen interrupted her thoughts.
"Come on, little miss. We need to get out of here."
Catrin wondered if she was making a mistake. Then she recalled the words Nat had written. "Embrace your role as the Herald. I implore you to use the divine gift you have been given." She considered those words, and they urged her to act.
"No,"
she said in a firm voice.
"I will not run from this challenge, and I will no longer tolerate these invaders of my homeland."
"What would you have us do, Catrin? I'm yours to command,"
Benjen said, shocking everyone. He knelt in the sodden soil and bowed to her. Chase, Strom, and Osborne stood silently. Catrin considered her next words carefully, not knowing what she was going to say or do. She looked around her, and the muddy water brought back a part of Nat's message, one line in particular, and she said,
"The water shapes the land. I want you to dig from here," she said, pointing to the soil around the base of the finger of the rock, "to here. We need a trough from the dry to the wet, and it should be as deep as possible." "What are you talking about, Cat? We don't have time for this. We need to get out of here," Chase said. "We cannot run anymore, Chase. There is nowhere safe to hide. I choose to fight," she said, and she began to dig with her bare hands as Benjen loosened the soil with his sword.
All but Chase began to dig, but he soon crouched down along with the rest. Trench grew quickly, the sodden soil making their work easier.
"Stay on the north side of the trench," Catrin warned. "But we need to go south to escape,"
Chase argued, looking at a massive fist of rock that blocked their path and would not budge. "Just dig around it," Catrin said, following Chase's gaze. "The trench need not be straight." As they dug their way closer to the water, the ditch began to flood, and they continued to dig from higher ground. As water began pouring over the cliff's edge, Catrin and Benjen looked over to see what was happening below. A few soldiers watched from the valley floor, but most were scaling the cliff face in an effort to reach them. Catrin and the others watched the water move through the ditch, eroding the soil around it. Deeper and wider the trough grew, gradually sending larger amounts of water into the valley, but it was not enough. It was happening far too slowly to make any difference. It mocked their meager effort, and helplessness washed over Catrin. She watched the flow intently, seeing tremendous potential energy latent in the calm water, and she knew there must be a way to unleash it. Without realizing it, she opened her mind to Ishtra's energy and attempted to ply it with her will. She started by trying to push the water over the edge, hoping to make it go faster, but the water repelled her. Any force she exerted on the water became fragmented, scattered in 100 directions, and her efforts had no visible effect. Her frustration flared into anger, and she turned to the rest of the group. "Go north. I'll catch up with you soon." "But, Cat," Chase began, but she cut him short. "If you value your lives, go north now," she said in a commanding voice, despite her fear. Her legs trembled, her face flushed and nostrils flared. Her heart pounded in her ears. Chase and the others headed north, frequently looking over their shoulders. A strange feeling came over her as she watched Chase walk away. So many times she had followed him on his adventures, but now she knew she must stand alone. As she embraced the energy around her, she prayed she would not unwittingly create another disaster. The lives of her friends now rested in her hands, and she was determined to save them. With confidence born of every lesson her father and Benjen and Chase had ever taught her, Catrin moved to the finger of rock. Its base had been exposed by the modest flow of water that rushed by, but she strode to the edge of the finger, seemingly oblivious to the winds tearing at her. Doing her best to keep from trembling, she spoke in a voice that carried across the Pinnock Valley. "Armies of the Zhan, you are not welcome here," she began. In the next moment, though, she panicked. No more words would come. Her throat was closing. She was no hero. She felt just like a little girl. Old fears constricted her heart, and she nearly fled. But then, in her mind, she saw the faces of Benjen and Chase and her friends. With a fire burning in her belly, she renewed her commitment and tried to find words befitting a great hero. "I am the keeper of this land, and I forbid you passage. Retreat now, or feel the weight of my wrath," she said, and her statement carried on the air to the soldiers below. They laughed at such threats coming from a girl, and Catrin turned without another word. She strode back to the edge of the widening trough, gazing at it a moment more before moving north. Some 50 paces away she stopped, hoping Chase wasn't right. Maybe she had lost her senses, but it was far too late to turn back. She would have to endure the consequences of her decisions and actions. Facing the cliff, she felt the heat of her anger toward the invaders, and it purged her fears. Her body quivered with energy as she gathered it and pulled it to her, reveling in its glory. She could smell its fragrance and taste its sweetness, but a searing pain in her left thigh distracted her for a moment, feeling as if her limb were on fire. She ignored it and drew in a deep breath, letting the soldiers' laughter feed her rage. "You bear witness to the call of the Herald," she announced. "I have warned you, and you have mocked me, and you will suffer for that." She clasped her hands high above her head, energy swirling through her fingers and dancing over her palms. It pulsed around her. She brought her hands down in a powerful arc as she shouted, "You will not pass!" When her fist struck the soil, a huge shockwave sent ripples of power through the plateau with a massive echoing boom, and the land pulsed as if it were liquid. Waves of energy rolled away from her. The floodwaters transferred the energy as waves crashed against the irregularity of the far cliffs and returned to punish the saturated shoreline. Unable to withstand the power of the water, large sections of rock and soil were dislodged and pushed into the Pinnock Valley. As tremors shook the ground beneath her feet, Catrin ran toward her companions. The massive chain reaction gained momentum, and the thunderous roar became nearly unbearable. But even in her retreat, Catrin was compelled to witness what she had wrought. Water crashed around the finger of rock, carrying gobbets of dirt and rock away with it, and with an ear-shattering crack, The rock slumped forward and leaned into the valley. Water rushed in eagerly to fill the gap, and a tremendous roar reverberated through the valley. Catrin watched in disbelief as the finger of rock tumbled away in a deluge. In a massive release of potential energy, water assailed rock and soil, and the cliffs parted. Gravity pulled the water into the valley, and the din of a massive rock slide accompanied the rush of the fall. Rock and debris clogged the valley, and a towering wall of water rushed to greet the main body of the advancing army. Cries of man and horse rose above the din, but Catrin had no time to consider what her senses told her as more of the plateau began to collapse. She fled the devastation and tried to catch up to the rest of the group, already moving swiftly north. The upper Chinwapa Valley, which lay ahead, drained quickly, and muddy shores rose from the depths. There Catrin's friends stopped to wait for her. Unsure of what to say, she approached them tentatively, half expecting them to tell her she was crazy or leave her behind, but they welcomed her silently. Chase grabbed her in a bear hug. "I'm sorry I doubted you," he whispered. Benjen held up his hand to speak. "You have followed me, but I can no longer lead you," he said. "I've heard the call of the Herald, and I will go wherever she leads me. I will do what she asks of me, and I will lay down my life to save hers," he finished, bowing to Catrin. The others made similar vows, and Catrin was left to stand in wonder. She'd had no preparation for this, and she did not know what was expected of her. She knew that she was leaving one reality and stepping into a new existence, and she was unsure of the consequences of this new power. Finally, Strom broke the uncomfortable silence. "I'm just glad Catrin's on our side." Sweat dripped into Nat's eyes as he scrambled down a craggy face. He climbed with a mixture of haste and care. His experience urged him to exercise caution, but his instincts told him he must flee. The Jean were close, closer than ever before. Already he had been near enough to see their eyes. Using his staff to steady himself, he climbed past an awkward outcropping. When he reached the narrow band of greenery that stood between the base of the mountain and the sand, Nat cursed. He was starving and exhausted. After giving up on finding Catrin, all he had wanted was to get back to town, to find some way to get to Miss Maris, and food. The need for food and water was sapping his strength and his sanity. Several times he had found himself wandering without any idea of where he was going, or where he had been. All he could remember was that he needed to keep moving. Suddenly stopping, he realized he'd done it again. Ankle deep in sand, he turned, and only the mountains behind him gave him a sense of where he was. What he saw when he lowered his gaze made his location seem irrelevant. Half a dozen mounted men were heading straight for him, and there was little Nat could do but wait for them to arrive. Maybe they would give him food, he thought, but what was left of his reason suggested it was unlikely. Turning away from the Jean, back the way his subconscious had been leading him, he walked. When he raised his eyes again, certain the Jean would overtake him at any moment, he was confused to find that he must have gotten turned around again, for before him came riders in a cloud of dust.